Welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now let's start with the first story. It's called Some Sports. I ducked into a cozy, quiet pub in Little Venice for a late lunch last Friday and to catch up on some work emails. While I was on vacation in London, a man walked in, ordered a pint and sat down. But then he started calling across the dining room to the bartender, asking her to turn on the TV to Some Sports. After his third complaint about there being no sports to watch, the bartender finally marched into the dining room with the remote. She turned on the TV. "ESPN then?" she asked. Yes, he replied. She flipped it on, waited for the commercial to end, then smiled at him as the game came back on. Women's cricket. She gave him a nod, then turned and went back to the bar. He finished his beer quickly, then quietly left. The next story is called You Told Me. I work in a very small medical practice. We are currently looking to add a new front desk position to help me, the main front desk person. My boss, the MD who owns the practice, asked me to help conduct phone interviews and sent me about 10 candidates to schedule for this week. We have a very limited window in our workday when these interviews can take place. This morning, my boss came into the office already frustrated. She gave me a lecture over something completely out of my control, then went to my coworker's office and did the same to her for something also not in my coworker's control. Then she came back to me and asked why I had to reschedule some of the phone interviews my coworker and I were supposed to conduct yesterday afternoon. I explained that she, had been running 30 minutes behind with patients, so my coworker and I had to focus on the patients in front of us. The two candidates I needed to interview were very understanding and flexible when I asked if we could move the interviews to the next afternoon. My boss responded, "I don't want you doing interviews anymore. You are too busy. I only want you to schedule them for me and the other provider, who wasn't in today. We cannot be moving them around." I simply said, "Okay," and immediately moved the 3 interviews I had scheduled for myself that afternoon to her calendar. Since she already had 3 interviews scheduled, this filled her entire afternoon. She later reached out, asking why all these interviews were suddenly on her calendar. I replied, "You told me this morning that you didn't want me doing any of the interviews, so I moved them to your calendar. And you told me we couldn't move them, so I'm not sure how you want to proceed." After a pause, she just said, "Yeah, I'll take care of them." The last story is called Try It. I take tennis classes at the local club twice a week. One of the other students in the class is a 50-year-old gardener. Great guy. He's been in the business since he was about 20. We live in a small town, so a lot of people know him. And he's worked for quite a few over the years. He's well liked and friends with almost everyone. There's just one thing about his business. He trusts people a little too much. Sometimes he agrees on a price for a job without drafting a contract. He does the work, gets paid, and moves on. An old school, handshakes and a person's word are enough approach. Right next to the tennis courts, there's a house with a big garden. One day, someone overhit a ball and it landed there. Nothing unusual. It happens. After class, the gardener told us that the owner of that house actually owed him a lot of money. A couple of years ago, he completely remodeled and overhauled the garden. And when he finished, the owner asked for a few more days to make the payment. Those days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually the owner stopped returning his calls. Since there was no contract, there wasn't much he could legally do about it. At one point, he ran into the owner and confronted him about the debt. The owner didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he straight up said he wasn't going to pay and added, "What are you going to do? Go ahead, try to mess up my garden again. You can't step foot on my property, or I'll call the police on you." The gardener eventually let it go and moved on. A few classes later, Our coach mentioned that it was time to replace the tennis balls. This happens every couple of months, when they get too old and lose their bounce. There are about 3 to 4 cards, each holding between 80 to 100 tennis balls. The gardener asked the coach what he was going to do with the old ones, since there was no recycling program for tennis balls in town. The coach said he'd probably just throw them away. The gardener then asked if he could take them instead. The coach was curious, but agreed. After class, the gardener gathered the cards and started tossing all the old tennis balls over the fence into the house's garden. The rest of us, coach included, immediately understood what was happening and started helping. We threw around 300 tennis balls into the owner's garden. A few minutes later, the owner stormed outside, yelling, "Hey, you're doing this on purpose, messing up my garden," until he saw the gardener. He went silent, turned around, and walked right back inside. A little while later, the local police showed up. One of the officers knows the gardener and chatted with him for a bit. Then he turned to the coach and said, "We got a complaint about people tossing balls into the yard." The coach just smiled and said, "You know, they are learning. Overhits happen." The officer nodded, smiled and said, "You are absolutely right. Part of learning." Then turned around and left. And now it's become a tradition. Every time the club replaces the tennis balls, the coach makes sure the gardener gets them for a ceremonial game of tennis basketball, with the owner's garden as the hoop. Thanks for watching the video to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.